I am Julian, and I am 29 years old. 6 years ago, my own mother sat in her living room and systematically convinced my fiancé to leave me and marry my golden child brother. While I was working 60-hour weeks, desperately trying to build a solid future for the woman I loved, my parents looked her in the eye and essentially told her that I was a failure. They told her my brother could give her the real estate, the high society status, and the generational wealth I never would. They humiliated me and sold me out right in the heart of our family home, acting like I was just a starter package for a woman who deserved better. But there is one massive, earth-shattering thing they did not know. The multimillion-dollar downtown commercial development project my brother is currently begging to be a part of. The only thing that can save him from total bankruptcy and a massive lawsuit is entirely funded by me. And right now, they are standing in the grand foyer of an exclusive charity gala I am hosting, completely unaware that the man who holds their entire financial survival in his hands is the son they threw away like garbage. Before I tell you exactly how this all unfolded, hit the like button if you believe that karma never misses an address, even if it takes a few years to arrive. And please, let me know what state or country you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means the world to me and helps this channel grow. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare began so you can understand the sheer magnitude of what was taken from me and what I had to do to take my life back. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive Tom Ford cologne and roasted filet mignon. It was a crisp Friday night in late October, the kind of evening where the crystal chandeliers above seemed to hum with the raw energy of the city's most powerful people. I was standing near the main entrance of the grand hall, dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than my entire first year's salary right out of college. I held a glass of sparkling water, exchanging pleasantries with a local state senator and a senior partner at a massive corporate law firm, when the heavy, gold-trimmed oak doors swung open. My mother, Vivian, walked in first. She wore a deep navy designer gown, her posture rigid and demanding. Her eyes immediately began scanning the room, calculating exactly who was worth talking to, who she needed to impress, and who she could comfortably ignore. Behind her was my father, Richard, trailing a few steps back like an obedient, exhausted shadow, exactly as he had done for the last 40 years of his life. And then came my brother, Tristan. He walked with his chest puffed out, adjusting the French cuffs of a suit that I could tell, even from 50 feet away, was bought on credit. He had that insufferable, arrogant smirk plastered across his face, playing the role of the wildly successful entrepreneur he always pretended to be. Clinging tightly to his arm was Nadia, my former fiancée, now my brother's wife. I watched them take in the sheer scale of the event. The string quartet playing softly in the corner, the massive ice sculptures glittering under the spotlights, the silent auction tables draped in black velvet featuring items like private jets to Aspen and vintage Rolexes. Tristan's eyes lit up with absolute, unfiltered greed. This was exactly the kind of room he had spent his entire adult life desperately pretending he belonged in. Vivian leaned over and whispered something into his ear, probably pointing out a CEO or a wealthy real estate developer she recognized from the cover of Forbes magazine. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, letting the moment stretch out into eternity. My wife, Serena, stepped up beside me. She slipped her arm through mine. She was wearing a breathtaking emerald green dress that caught the light with every subtle movement, radiating the kind of effortless, quiet grace that you absolutely cannot buy, no matter how high your credit card limit is. Serena knew exactly who had just walked through those doors. She knew the entire history, but she didn't tense up. She just stood by my side, a pillar of absolute strength. And then it happened. The moment I had spent thousands of hours dreaming about during my darkest nights. My mother's predatory gaze swept across the room and landed directly on me. For a split second, I actually saw her brain short-circuit. She blinked twice, her perfectly practiced polite society smile completely freezing on her face. Her hand tightened around her crystal clutch. She nudged Tristan hard in the ribs. Tristan looked over, annoyed at first, but then his eyes met mine. The arrogant smirk he always wore simply melted off his jaw like hot wax. Nadia followed their eye line. When she saw me standing at the center of the room, looking like a man who owned the building, which, for the record, I essentially did for the night. All the blood drained from her face. But the true shock didn't fully register until their eyes shifted slightly to the left, landing on the woman standing beside me. When they saw Serena, their expressions shifted from simple surprise to pure, unadulterated terror. They realized in real time that they weren't just crashing a high society party to rub elbows with rich strangers. They were standing in my arena. They were breathing my air. I didn't wave at them. I didn't nod in acknowledgement. I just held their collective gaze with absolute, freezing indifference. I wanted them to feel the ground shift entirely beneath their feet. I wanted the heavy realization of their monumental mistake to settle deep into their bones. But to truly understand the weight of that heavy silence, to understand why seeing them squirm brought me a level of dark satisfaction I can barely even put into words, you have to understand exactly what they did to me. You have to understand the slow, quiet, devastating cruelty of being raised as the scapegoat son in a family that worshipped false idols. I grew up in a household where love was not unconditional. Love was a currency, and it was entirely based on how much you elevated the family's public image. I was always the quiet one. I liked building things, sketching out architectural designs on scrap paper, saving my allowance. I wasn't flashy. I didn't demand attention. Tristan, on the other hand, was a black hole of need. He was loud, he was charismatic in a very manipulative way, and he demanded the spotlight at all times. My mother catered to his every whim, convincing herself and everyone else that his arrogance was actually just early signs of extreme brilliance. By the time we reached adulthood, the dynamic was completely set in stone. I was the reliable, boring worker bee. Tristan was the visionary destined for greatness. It didn't matter that my path was stable and real, and his was built entirely on lies and my parents' money. In their eyes, he was the king, and I was just a peasant lucky enough to share his last name. I accepted it because I thought that was just how families worked. I thought if I just kept my head down, did the right thing, and built my own life, they would eventually respect me. I was so incredibly wrong. Their lack of respect for me wasn't a passive oversight. It was an active, aggressive campaign to keep me beneath them, and they proved it by taking the one thing in the world that actually mattered to me. When I was 23 years old, I was working as a junior architect at a mid-sized, highly competitive firm. I was putting in grueling 60-hour weeks, staring at CAD software until my vision blurred. I wasn't rich, not by a long shot. I lived in a modest, two-bedroom apartment in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood. I paid all my own bills. I never asked my parents for a dime, and I was diligently putting away a solid percentage of my meager salary into a 401k. I drove a reliable 7-year-old Honda sedan. I thought I was doing everything right. I was building a foundation. My brother, Tristan, was 26 at the time. He had never held a real W-2 job for more than 8 consecutive months in his entire life. He loved to call himself an entrepreneur, which in his case was just a fancy, socially acceptable word for someone who took our parents' hard-earned money and flushed it down the drain on terrible, poorly researched business ventures. Despite producing absolutely nothing of value, he drove a brand new, leased Porsche. He wore custom Italian shoes. He lived in a stunning luxury penthouse downtown, the lease for which my father quietly co-signed because Tristan's credit was completely destroyed. In our house, Tristan was the sun, and the rest of us were just lucky to be caught in his gravitational pull. My mother worshipped the ground he walked on. Everything Tristan did was framed as a stroke of genius. Everything I did was framed as just adequate. If I came home and announced I got a promotion and a small salary bump, my mother would pat my arm condescendingly and say, "That's nice, Julian. Make sure you save it." Tristan just had a very important lunch meeting with a venture capitalist. He's closing in on $1 million deal. The $1 million deal never actually materialized, of course, but the narrative remained untouched. My father, Richard, never intervened. He was the classic enabler. He chose the path of least resistance every single time, which meant quietly writing massive checks to keep Tristan's fake wealthy lifestyle afloat, and completely ignoring my existence to avoid upsetting my mother. Then I met Nadia. Nadia was a graphic designer who worked in the building next to my firm. We met at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning. She was warm, she was beautiful, and she seemed completely grounded. We started dating, and for the first time in my life I felt truly seen. We dated for 2 years. She knew exactly what my financial situation was. She knew I wasn't wealthy, but she constantly told me she loved my ambition. She told me she loved that I was honest, that I worked hard, and that I was building something real from the ground up. I proposed to her in our tiny kitchen, offering her a modest ring I had saved up for 6 months to buy. She cried. She said yes, and she promised me forever. I thought I had finally found my own family. I thought I was safe. The very first crack in the foundation appeared during Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. We were all sitting around the massive, long mahogany dining table my mother prized so highly. The food was spread out like a royal feast, but the air in the room was incredibly suffocating. My mother sat at the head of the table, completely dominating the conversation as usual. Tristan was loudly bragging about a new commercial real estate venture he was allegedly putting together. A venture that hadn't even broken ground, had no permits, and no actual investors. But he spoke about it like he was already the next Donald Trump. Out of nowhere, my mother turned her laser focus entirely onto Nadia. "Nadia, darling," Vivian purred, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive red wine. "I was just telling Tristan that his penthouse is far too large for one person. It really is a shame. The view of the city skyline from his balcony is simply breathtaking. You've been up there, haven't you?" Nadia smiled politely, looking a little uncomfortable, shifting in her chair. "No, Mrs. Vance. I haven't been to Tristan's place." My mother didn't miss a beat. Her eyes locked onto Nadia like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Oh, you simply must go. It is exactly the kind of place a beautiful, refined young woman like you deserves to wake up in. I keep telling Tristan he needs to settle down with someone who truly appreciates the finer things in life. Someone who can inspire him to grow his empire." I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned stark white. The implication was heavy and entirely intentional. It wasn't just a glowing compliment to Tristan. It was a direct, calculated insult to the modest life I was providing for Nadia. I looked over at my father, silently begging him to intervene, to change the subject. He just stared at his mashed potatoes, completely mute. I forced a tight laugh, trying to diffuse the tension. "We love our apartment, Mom," I said firmly. "It's home. We're happy." My mother completely ignored me. She didn't even turn her head in my direction. She kept her eyes locked on Nadia, waiting for a response. And Nadia didn't look away. She didn't defend our home. She didn't defend me. She just offered my mother a very quiet, strangely thoughtful smile. Under the table, I reached out to grab Nadia's hand for reassurance, but her fingers were stiff and ice-cold. She pulled away slightly. Over the next few months, a slow, subtle shift occurred in my relationship. Nadia started complaining about our strict household budget. She started spending hours obsessing over social media influencers who flaunted designer bags, luxury cars, and 5-star vacations. She would go out to run simple errands on a Saturday afternoon and come back 4 hours later with expensive iced coffees from the high-end retail district located right next to Tristan's luxury building. When I asked her about it, she would get incredibly defensive, claiming she just happened to be in the neighborhood and I was being controlling. Then came the night that permanently shattered my reality. I was working late on a massive commercial design project. My mother had been nagging me for 3 straight weeks to bring over a heavy box of old tax documents and family records my father needed to give to their accountant for an impending audit. I finally packed the box and drove to their house around 9 o'clock in the evening. As I pulled up the long, winding driveway, I immediately noticed Tristan's leased Porsche parked out front. I walked up the brick pathway to the front door, carrying the heavy cardboard box. I was reaching out to turn the brass handle when I heard loud laughter coming from the open bay window of the living room. It was my mother's laugh, sharp and calculating, mixed with a deeper, arrogant chuckle from Tristan. And then, clear as a bell in the cool night air, I heard Nadia's voice. I froze dead in my tracks. My own fiancée, the woman I was supposed to marry in 6 months, was inside my parents' house, late at night, drinking wine without telling me a single word about it. I set the heavy box down quietly on the porch. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer. I stepped closer to the window, staying hidden in the deep shadows of the large rhododendron bushes. I peered inside. The three of them were sitting on the plush leather sofas, relaxed, holding crystal glasses of wine. "You are a very, very smart woman, Nadia," my mother was saying, her tone low, hypnotic, and incredibly persuasive. "Julian is a good boy, I will give him that. But he is a plodder. He is a worker bee. He is going to spend the next 30 years stressing over paying off a mortgage, arguing about the grocery bill, and worrying about saving up for a basic college fund. Tristan can give you the life Julian never could. He has the status. He has the financial security. He can give you everything a woman of your caliber actually deserves." I stopped breathing. The night air suddenly felt like absolute ice in my lungs. My mother was actively trying to ruin my life. I waited for Nadia to stand up. I waited for her to throw the wine in my mother's face. I waited for her to fiercely defend the beautiful, honest life we were building together, to tell them they were sick and twisted for even suggesting such a disgusting betrayal. Instead, Nadia took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine. She looked across the coffee table at Tristan, who was sitting back with his legs crossed, smirking like a predator who had just successfully cornered a rabbit. "I do want stability," Nadia said softly, staring into her glass. "Julian is always working, he's always tired, but we never seem to actually get ahead. It's exhausting." "Then stop exhausting yourself, sweetheart," Tristan said smoothly, leaning forward and resting his arms on his knees. "You belong in a place where you don't have to check the price tags before you buy something." I didn't kick the door in. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a rock through the window. In that exact moment, I felt a cold, dark, endless void open up in the absolute center of my chest. They were trading me. My mother was literally brokering a business deal to reassign my future wife to my older brother, simply because she viewed Tristan as the superior asset and me as a worthless liability. I backed away from the window. I walked to my car, got in, and drove away into the dark. I drove for 2 straight hours on the highway, gripping the steering wheel until my hands went completely numb. 3 days after that agonizing night at the window, Nadia sat me down at our small, scratched kitchen table. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her. She refused to make eye contact with me. "Julian, I have been doing a lot of thinking, and I think we rushed into this engagement," she began, reciting a perfectly rehearsed script that I instantly recognized. "I need real financial stability. I need to feel secure. I'm just not sure our visions for the future are aligned right now. You work so hard, but it's just not enough. I don't want to hold you back, and I need to do what is right for my own future." I looked at the woman I was supposed to pledge my life to. I looked at the modest, sensible engagement ring I had sacrificed for months to buy, sparkling pathetically on her finger. I didn't ask her if she had been talking to Tristan. I didn't mention the conversation I had overheard in the bushes. I knew exactly whose poisonous words she was speaking. My mother had handed her the script, and Nadia was delivering it flawlessly. "Okay," I said quietly, just one single word. Nadia blinked, her head snapping up. She was clearly deeply surprised. She was expecting a massive fight. She was expecting me to drop to my knees, to beg, to cry, to promise I would take on a second job and work even harder to buy her the designer things she suddenly craved. "Okay, that's it. You're not even going to fight for us. If you want to leave, pack your things," I told her, my voice completely devoid of any human emotion. "The door is right there." She packed 2 large suitcases that very afternoon. As she stood by the front door, rolling her luggage out of my life forever, she shot me a look that I will never forget. It was a look that was half guilty, but mostly triumphant. She genuinely thought she was trading up. She thought she had secured her golden ticket to high society. She thought I was just a stepping stone on her path to greatness. I didn't call my parents to confront them. There was absolutely no point in starting a screaming match with people who fundamentally did not value my existence as a human being. A confrontation would only give them the satisfaction of knowing they had broken me. Instead, I executed a complete, hard reset on my entire life. I walked into my firm the next morning and handed in my resignation. I broke the lease on my apartment. I packed every single thing I owned into a rented U-Haul truck, and I drove 3 states away to a city where nobody knew my name. I changed my phone number. I deleted all my social media accounts. I didn't leave a forwarding address. As far as my toxic family was concerned, I had simply evaporated into thin air. For the first 2 years, the pain was a physical, crushing weight on my chest. Felt like I was breathing through a wet towel. But I learned a very valuable lesson during that time. Anger is a spectacular fuel source if you know exactly how to refine it and burn it properly. I took all of that betrayal, all of that profound humiliation, and I weaponized it. I partnered up with an older, incredibly brilliant architect named Felix. Felix had the industry connections, and I had a relentless, borderline psychotic work ethic. We started our own boutique architectural firm. We took on the brutal, high-stress, extremely complex commercial projects that the bigger, lazier firms rejected because they were too much work. I worked until my eyes literally bled. I slept under my drafting table. I poured every ounce of my trauma into blueprints, zoning board meetings, and client pitches. Our massive breakthrough came when we aggressively outbid a legacy firm and secured a multi-million-dollar contract to design a flagship luxury hotel downtown. The payout from that single contract was entirely life-changing. But I didn't stop there. I wasn't just interested in a high salary anymore. I wanted undeniable, unshakable power. I attended a networking event and met a brilliant tech developer named Marcus. Marcus had built an incredible software startup targeting real estate logistics, but he had absolutely zero capital to scale it. He was desperate. I read his business plan, saw the genius in it, and took a massive, terrifying risk. I liquidated a huge chunk of my newly acquired savings and became his primary angel investor. Within 3 short years, Marcus's company exploded in market value, eventually being acquired by a massive conglomerate. I wasn't just earning a comfortable living anymore. I was building immense generational wealth. I bought a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a high-rise, making Tristan's leased apartment look like a college dorm room. I drove the exact exotic cars Tristan used to rent by the hour to impress girls, except I owned the titles free and clear. But I never, ever posted about it. I kept my digital footprint completely locked down and strictly professional. Let my family think I was still the struggling, defeated younger brother. The element of surprise is the most powerful weapon a man can wield. Occasionally, ghosts from my past would reach out through the digital void. A naive family friend named Sylvia, completely unaware of the toxic, radioactive dynamic of my family, tracked down my professional email address. She sent me chirpy, oblivious updates about my parents. She sent me photos of Tristan and Nadia's lavish, over-the-top wedding. She told me Tristan was doing so incredibly well in his business ventures and that my mother was so proud. Out of morbid curiosity, I asked Marcus to utilize some of his corporate contacts to run a quiet, thorough background check on Tristan's so-called real estate empire. What Marcus brought back in his encrypted file made me laugh out loud in the silence of my massive office. Tristan's business was a complete house of cards. It was a joke. He was heavily over-leveraged on every single property. He was surviving on massive, high-interest business loans and burning through my parents' retirement funds and the equity in their home just to maintain the illusion of being a tycoon. He was one bad month away from total financial annihilation. That brings us back to the night of the charity gala. The night I finally let them see me. After the initial, earth-shattering shock of seeing me at the entrance, my family quickly scrambled to recover their masks. I spent the first hour of the event ignoring them completely, shaking hands with the mayor, taking photos with local politicians, and ensuring the silent auction was running smoothly. Serena, my incredible wife, was working the room with flawless precision, charming the exact investors Tristan desperately wanted to meet. About halfway through the evening, I noticed Tristan, Nadia, and my mother quietly slip away from the main ballroom and head down a secluded, dimly lit corridor toward the private VIP meeting lounges. My instincts instantly flared. I excused myself from a conversation with a wealthy donor and followed them quietly, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. The heavy door to the VIP lounge was slightly ajar. I stood just outside, hidden in the shadows, listening intently. The acoustics in the hallway carried their hushed voices perfectly to my ears. "You need to be smart about this, Tristan," my mother hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Julian is obviously in way over his head here. All this flash, these politicians, the expensive catering, it's just for show. There is absolutely no way he has the capital to host something like this on his own. He's a junior architect, for God's sake. He has to have a major backer. He's fronting for someone else." I know, Tristan snapped back, pacing the room aggressively. "If we can just find out who his investors are, I can bypass Julian and pitch them my downtown project directly. I offer them a better return on investment, we cut Julian completely out of the picture, and I get the funding I desperately need before the banks call in my loans and seize the house." My mother nodded enthusiastically in agreement. I stood there, feeling the blood rush in my ears. They were standing inside a venue that I personally paid for, drinking expensive champagne that I provided, actively conspiring to steal the success they assumed I had borrowed, just to save Tristan's pathetic, failing vanity projects. Then, Nadia chimed in. Her voice was calm, almost bored, devoid of any moral compass. I could just talk to him. Julian used to tell me everything. He was always so desperate for my approval. He's still a man, Tristan. If I approach him the right way, if I turn on the charm, I can get him to drop the name of his sponsor before the night is over. My stomach physically turned. The sheer audacity, the disgusting, boundless arrogance of this woman, casually offering to use her sexuality to manipulate her ex-fiancé in order to save her husband's sinking ship. They hadn't changed one bit. They were still the same parasitic, entitled, morally bankrupt people who gutted me in a living room 6 years ago. I could have walked into that room right then. I could have laughed in their faces, exposed their bankruptcy, and told my private security team to throw them out onto the street in front of the entire city. But that would have been far too easy. A quick humiliation wasn't enough. They needed to learn a lesson they would feel in their marrow for the rest of their natural lives. I backed away from the heavy wooden door, making sure my footsteps made absolutely no sound. I walked quickly down the plush corridor, my mind racing 1,000,000 miles a minute, calculating variables and logistics. I found Serena standing near the grand sweeping staircase, elegantly dodging a conversation with a tedious hedge fund manager. She took one look at the intense expression on my face, immediately handed her half-empty champagne flute to a passing waiter, and stepped toward me. "What happened?" she asked, her voice low, steady, and incredibly grounding. I pulled her into a quiet alcove near the coat check and told her everything. I told her about the pathetic plotting in the VIP room, about Nadia's vile, desperate suggestion to seduce the information out of me, and about Tristan's frantic, sweaty need to secure funding for his phantom downtown project. Serena didn't gasp. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me to just forgive and forget. My wife is a brilliant, former investment banker who understands exactly how the real world operates. She looked at me with those sharp, intelligent, calculating eyes, reached out, and gently straightened my silk tie. "We don't just shut the door on people like this, Julian," she whispered fiercely, her eyes locking onto mine. "We buy the entire building, and we demolish it while they're still trapped inside. Let them play their game. We are going to change the rules." The next morning, the residual anger inside me had completely distilled into pure, ice-cold, calculating focus. I didn't want to just cut them off or embarrass them at a party. I wanted to engineer a scenario where Tristan's legendary arrogance would be the exact weapon that destroyed him publicly and legally. I wanted to dismantle him in front of the very society he worshipped. I picked up my phone and arranged a private lunch at an incredibly exclusive, members-only downtown steakhouse with a man named Harrison. Harrison was a senior board member of the massive commercial real estate development that Tristan was frantically trying to attach himself to. What Tristan didn't know, what absolutely nobody outside a very tight circle of ironclad NDAs knew, was that my private holding company was the primary financial backer of that entire development. I essentially owned the board, and Harrison answered directly to me. Harrison sat across from me in a private leather booth, cutting into a $300 dry-aged ribeye. "We received a proposal package yesterday from a guy named Tristan Vance," Harrison said casually, taking a slow sip of his expensive bourbon. "Familiar last name. Any relation to you?" "Unfortunately, he's my older brother," I replied, leaning back in the booth, swirling the ice in my scotch glass. Harrison raised a thick eyebrow, pausing with his fork halfway to his mouth. "I see. Well, speaking strictly confidentially between partners, his proposal is a complete and utter disaster. The financials are entirely smoke and mirrors. We ran a deep-dive forensic audit on his LLCs. The kid is carrying massive, toxic debt. In fact, he's taken on high-interest bridge loans from Victor Vance. No relation to you, I assume, just a local shark who specializes in predatory lending to desperate developers. Tristan is drowning Julian. He's banking on this exact development to pull him out of the grave. If he doesn't secure this contract, he's finished." I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "Is that so? Tell me, Harrison, what happens to Tristan financially if our board publicly and officially rejects his bid?" Harrison chuckled darkly. "If word gets out on the street that this board passed on him, the sharks will instantly smell blood in the water. Victor will immediately call in the high-interest loans. Tristan won't be able to pay. The banks will seize his assets to cover the margins. They'll force a sale on his penthouse, and he'll be forced into Chapter 7 liquidation within 60 days. It will be a bloodbath." "Perfect," I said, leaning forward. "Do not reject him yet. Keep him on the hook. String him along. Send him encouraging emails, ask for minor revisions to his proposal, just enough to make him think he has a legitimate chance. I want him feeling very, very confident next month." As I was meticulously laying the financial trap, another piece of absolute gold fell directly into my lap. I had recently hired a highly discreet, ex-detective private investigator to look into the exact extent of my parents' financial entanglement with Tristan's failing business. I needed to know if Richard and Vivian's retirement funds and the equity in their home were going to sink with Tristan's ship, because if they were, I wanted a front-row seat. The investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, called me on my secure line on a Tuesday afternoon. "I have the financial report, Julian. It's bad," Elena reported, the sound of typing in the background. "Your parents are legally co-signed on his luxury penthouse lease, and they've guaranteed 2 of his massive business credit lines using their own home equity as collateral. When he goes down, they take a massive hit. They might lose their house. But honestly, that's not the most interesting part of the file. You told me to keep a peripheral eye on his wife, Nadia, right?" "Yes," I said, my heart rate picking up slightly. "What did you find?" "I've got time-stamped, high-resolution photos of Nadia entering a cheap boutique motel on the edge of the city. 3 times a week, regular as clockwork, from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. She meets a guy named Kyle. He's a 24-year-old personal trainer at the luxury gym Tristan currently pays for her to attend. Apparently, ever since Tristan's credit cards started getting declined at the high-end department stores a few months ago, she's been seeking comfort elsewhere. She's cheating on him, Julian, extensively." I actually had to put the phone on mute for a few seconds so Elena wouldn't hear me laughing uncontrollably. Nadia, the incredibly pragmatic, calculating woman who abandoned me for stability and wealth, was currently sleeping with a broke, hourly wage personal trainer in a cheap motel by the highway because her golden boy husband was secretly bankrupt. The poetic justice was so potent I could practically taste it. I had all the ammunition I could ever possibly need. I had Tristan's complete financial ruin loaded in the chamber, ready to fire. And I had the detonator for his entire marriage sitting in a glossy manila folder on my mahogany desk. The following month, my architectural firm and Serena's investment bank were co-hosting the largest mega gala of the autumn season. It wasn't just a charity party. It was the ultimate networking event for the city's absolute elite. State governors, tech billionaires, venture capitalists, and the exact board members Tristan was desperately trying to impress to save his life would all be in that one room. I personally contacted the event coordinators. I gave them 3 names to add to the highly restricted VIP guest list: Tristan Vance, Vivian Vance, and Nadia Vance. I ensured their invitations were printed on the finest, thickest cream cardstock, embossed with gold lettering, and hand-delivered to their doors by a courier. I knew their inflated egos would never let them decline. They would see the invitation as concrete proof that they had finally cracked the upper echelon of society. They would spend hours getting ready, renting expensive clothes if they had to, completely unaware that I was the one holding the door open for them, just so I could slam it directly on their hands. I used to think the betrayal 6 years ago was the defining, most traumatic moment of our family dynamic. I was so incredibly wrong. The true defining moment, the absolute destruction of the Vance family illusion, was about to happen under the bright, unforgiving lights of $1,000 a plate dinner. They thought they were walking into their salvation. They were walking into an execution. The night of the Foundation's mega gala arrived with a crisp, biting chill in the air, carrying that specific electric energy that always makes the city feel alive during the autumn season. We had spent months securing and preparing a fully restored, legendary Art Deco theater right in the heart of the downtown financial district. It was an absolute masterpiece of early 20th century architecture, glowing from within like a massive, gilded jewel box sitting on the edge of the avenue. Every single floor-to-ceiling stained glass window spilled warm, amber light onto the polished marble steps outside. A small army of valet drivers in pristine uniforms stood at attention, ready to receive the wealthiest and most influential figures in the entire state. I stood near the main entrance with Serena, personally greeting our guests as they arrived. Every handshake I initiated, every polite smile I gave, and every brief exchange of pleasantries was completely deliberate and heavily calculated. This was my arena now. I had spent the last 6 years of my life bleeding, sweating, and sacrificing everything to build an absolute fortress of success. I had missed holidays, I had worked through sickness, and I had funneled every ounce of my trauma into building an unbreakable corporate empire. And tonight, I was voluntarily lowering the drawbridge for the exact people who had once tried to bury me in the mud. Through the massive, brass-trimmed glass double doors, I watched the endless parade of luxury vehicles pull up to the velvet ropes. And then I saw it. A sleek, black, extended wheelbase Rolls-Royce glided up to the valet stand, its polished grille reflecting the flashing lights of the event photographers. I actually had to bite the inside of my cheek to suppress a dark, bitter laugh from escaping my chest. I knew the absolute truth about his finances. Tristan was actively drowning in toxic, high-interest debt. He was facing absolute financial liquidation within the quarter. He owed money to people who did not send polite collection letters. And yet, he still went entirely out of his way to rent a Rolls-Royce for the night just to maintain his pathetic, crumbling illusion of superiority. He was bleeding out financially from a severed artery, yet he chose to buy a bandage made of designer silk just so people would think he was bleeding wealth. The valet opened the heavy rear door of the Rolls-Royce. My mother, Vivian, stepped out first. She was wearing a deep navy designer gown that was impeccably tailored to her frame. I recognized the designer. The dress alone probably cost more than a full year of my old junior architect's salary. Her expression was perfectly poised but incredibly, desperately hungry. Her eyes immediately began scanning the crowd on the red carpet, rapidly calculating the net worth of everyone around her. She was looking for anyone she could use to elevate her own social standing, anyone who could offer a stepping stone for her golden child. My father, Richard, followed her out of the vehicle. He looked gray, tired, and entirely diminished. He was wearing a tuxedo that looked 10 years out of date, trailing behind his wife like an exhausted employee who had long ago given up on asking for a promotion. Then came Tristan. He stepped out of the luxury car, aggressively buttoning his tailored jacket. He was wearing a suit that was almost perfect, but he looked just a little too eager. He lacked the relaxed grace of true wealth. Instead, he possessed the frantic, hyper-alert energy of a man who knew his entire life was a fragile house of cards. He was desperately praying a strong gust of wind wouldn't blow through the lobby and knock his fake empire into the dirt. Clinging tightly to his arm was Nadia, my former fiancée, the woman who had traded my honest devotion, my hard work, and my unconditional love for a fraudulent empire built on my parents' drained retirement accounts. Her dress was shimmering, silver, and undeniably expensive, undoubtedly bought on a maxed-out credit card that Tristan could not pay off. She smiled for the event photographers, but the smile was incredibly thin, strained, and panicked around the edges. When they walked through the ornate doors, stepped into the grand foyer, and finally realized I was the one standing at the absolute front of the receiving line, the sheer, unfiltered panic on their faces was absolutely cinematic. They did not expect me to be a guest, let alone the host. "Julian," my mother forced out, her voice tight, slightly raspy, and entirely devoid of genuine warmth. She was desperately trying to recover her composure, acting as if the last 6 years of total, agonizing estrangement had never happened. She tried to project the image of a proud, loving matriarch bumping into her son. "What an absolute surprise to see you here." I returned her smile, keeping my expression completely cool, steady, and entirely unreadable. I did not step forward to hug her. I did not offer my hand to my father. "Not a surprise, Mom. I am the co-chair and the primary financial underwriter of the event this year. Welcome to my gala." The flicker of pure, unadulterated shock in her eyes was almost imperceptible to a stranger, but I had studied that face my entire life. Caught it. I saw the exact moment her reality fractured and began to cave in on itself. Tristan glanced around nervously, his eyes aggressively darting to the VIP lanyards worn by the guests flowing past us. He was clearly noting the caliber of the people in attendance. These were the exact heavy-hitter real estate developers, massive venture capitalists, and ruthless hedge fund managers he had been trying to court for years without an ounce of success. Nadia's gaze kept darting nervously toward Serena. My wife stood beside me with the kind of effortless, terrifying confidence that made powerful people take notice without her having to say a single word. Nadia looked at Serena's posture, her jewelry, and the undeniable respect she commanded from the event staff, and I could see the bitter regret pooling in Nadia's eyes. Inside, the theater had been transformed into an absolute masterpiece of wealth and taste. The walls were draped in deep crimson velvet, accented by towering mirrored glass panels. The tables were dressed in imported, rich linens, and each centerpiece was a massive, cascading burst of fresh exotic orchids and flickering candlelight. The air smelled of expensive catering, aged wine, and old money. I had personally arranged the seating chart down to the exact millimeter. I made absolutely sure my family's table was located in full view of the main stage. Much more importantly, I ensured they were seated right next to Dominic. Dominic was the senior partner of the investment group currently handling the massive downtown real estate development that Tristan was desperately trying to chase. Throughout the elaborate cocktail hour, I drifted strategically from group to group. I engaged in easy, high-level conversation with state senators, hospital board directors, and tech innovators. But I never once took my peripheral vision off Tristan. Just as I had predicted, and just as my intimate knowledge of his massive ego guaranteed, he simply could not help himself. He was seated next to a billionaire, and he immediately started running his mouth trying to play the big shot. He was practically vibrating with the need to prove his worth. I waited until the first round of appetizers was cleared, ensuring the table was quiet and focused. I walked over to their table with deliberate, measured steps, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. "Tristan," I said, my voice carrying clearly, loudly enough for the surrounding tables to stop their quiet conversations and listen. "I hear you have been incredibly busy in the commercial real estate market lately." Tristan immediately straightened his posture, aggressively puffing his chest out. He was clearly thrilled to be acknowledged in a business context in front of the wealthy men he was trying to impress. He took the bait entirely, swallowing the hook right down to his stomach. "Yeah, Julian. I am working on some very, very big deals right now. Things are moving incredibly fast. Actually, I have been looking closely at that massive new downtown mixed-use development project. I am preparing a substantial multi-million-dollar bid as we speak. It might be the perfect fit for my corporate portfolio." He said it with such absolute, blinding conviction. He was hoping to secure his reputation as a major player right then and there. Dominic, the billionaire investor sitting directly next to him, stopped chewing his steak. He looked at Tristan with a deeply confused, almost pitying expression. Dominic knew the exact financials of the project. He then looked up at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave a slow, calculated nod, looking Tristan dead in the eye, stripping away every ounce of his borrowed confidence. "Ah yes, the downtown mixed-use project. The one my private holding company is fully funding and underwriting." The silence that followed was incredibly sharp. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating, absolute silence that sucks every single molecule of oxygen right out of the room. Dominic turned his head slightly, his interest completely caught, a knowing, predatory smirk playing on his lips as he realized exactly what I was doing to my own brother. Tristan blinked rapidly, his brain violently struggling to process the information. The financial savior he had been praying to, the invisible billionaire backer he was relying on to save him from total ruin, was his discarded little brother. He tried to mask the sudden, sheer terror in his eyes, but his face went completely ashen. My mother, ever the desperate manipulator, recovered first. She let out a forced, sickly sweet laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping on pavement. "Well, Julian, isn't that just a wonderful coincidence? A stroke of absolute luck. Maybe you two brothers could work together on it. Partner up. Keep the generational wealth inside the family where it belongs." "That is the thing about my firm, Mom," I said evenly, keeping my tone flawlessly polite but dripping with absolute, lethal finality. "We are being exceptionally selective right now. We only work with partners who have the right financial stability, a proven track record of successful developments, and zero toxic debt on their corporate ledgers. We simply do not take on liabilities. It is nothing personal against Tristan. It is just business." Nadia physically recoiled, shifting uncomfortably in her seat, crossing her legs tightly, her jaw locked in humiliation. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she knew she was trapped. I had just publicly announced to the exact investors Tristan desperately needed that he was completely financially unstable, effectively blacklisting him in front of the entire elite business community of the city. I had severed his lifeline with a butter knife in front of a live audience. I thought I had broken him, and that the worst of their humiliation was over. I was so incredibly wrong. Tristan's arrogance was a terminal disease, and he was about to dig his own grave even deeper. The real, devastating, completely unsurvivable blow came later in the evening, right as the dessert plates were being cleared and the live charity auction segment officially began. The master of ceremonies for the night was a well-known local celebrity and professional auctioneer named Barnaby. He was standing on the brightly lit stage, his voice booming over the state-of-the-art sound system, calling for bids on highly exclusive, wildly expensive items to raise money for the foundation. We had already successfully auctioned off a week in a private, fully staffed villa in Tuscany, a custom-built luxury sports car, and a round of golf with a former United States president. The energy in the room was exceptionally high, the expensive alcohol was flowing freely, and the massive egos of the city's elite were fully engaged in the spirit of competitive philanthropy. Then came an item I had personally donated to the foundation. A comprehensive, premium architectural and structural consultation from my boutique firm, entirely bypassing our strict 2-year client waitlist. It was highly coveted by the commercial real estate moguls in the room who wanted to fast-track their development permits. I fully expected the item to go to one of the higher-profile corporate donors, perhaps a hospital board looking to expand their campus. But when Barnaby started the bidding at $20,000, and the numbers quickly climbed to an incredibly impressive figure of $50,000, I saw a numbered paddle aggressively shoot up into the air from table number 4. It was Tristan. The entire room reacted almost immediately. There were surprised murmurs, sharp, confused whispers, and a few raised eyebrows from the corporate tables. Tristan was sitting there with his paddle held high, a defiant, sweaty, deeply arrogant look plastered on his face. I knew exactly what was happening in his twisted, desperate psychology. He was publicly bleeding out, his reputation was on the line, and he was trying to buy back his dominance. He was trying to prove to the room, to the investors sitting next to him, and most importantly to our mother, that he was still the wealthy, powerful golden child. He wanted everyone to believe he could casually throw around tens of thousands of dollars just to buy his younger brother's time. He thought he could publicly force me to be his subordinate. He thought he could buy my submission with money he did not even have. I was standing near the front of the stage, leaning casually against a high-top table. I didn't get angry. I didn't feel a spike of adrenaline. Instead, I felt a wave of absolute, freezing surgical calm wash over me. I calmly walked up the short velvet stairs to the stage, walked directly over to Barnaby, and gently took the heavy microphone from his hand. The entire ballroom, filled with hundreds of the most powerful people in the state, went completely, deathly silent. "That is an incredibly generous bid, Tristan," I said into the microphone. My voice echoed cleanly off the high vaulted ceilings, steady, unwavering, and entirely devoid of sibling affection. However, for the sake of full transparency to everyone in this room, and to protect the strict integrity of the Foundation's accounting, I should formally mention that the consultation package is strictly contingent on the winning bidder passing our firm's intensive financial vetting process. I paused, letting the silence stretch for 2 agonizing, heavy seconds. I looked directly down at Tristan, locking eyes with the man who had stolen my future wife and treated me like garbage. "We only partner with clients who have verified, liquid capital. We strictly do not work with individuals who rely on predatory bridge loans from local loan sharks to cover their daily operational margins. Nor do we associate with developers currently facing imminent foreclosure on their properties. I cannot, in good conscience, accept a bid funded by toxic debt. It would be a disservice to the charity." The words were spoken politely, calmly, without a single raised decibel or hint of malice. But in a room filled with savvy corporate investors, banking CEOs, and ruthless legal sharks, those words landed like a brutal, undeniable legal verdict. Everyone in that room understood exactly what I was saying without me having to scream it. I was publicly, surgically declaring that Tristan was completely, fundamentally broke. I was telling the city's elite that he was a massive financial liability, a fraud, and a man drowning in bad paper. I had just initiated the social equivalent of a massive lawsuit, stripping away his entire fake identity in under 30 seconds. Barnaby, sensing the massive, suffocating tension and being a true professional, quickly moved the bidding along to a wealthy hedge fund manager at the back of the room who raised his paddle to break the silence. Tristan slowly lowered his paddle, his hand physically shaking with rage and humiliation. His face was bright, mottled red, and his jaw was clenched so hard I legitimately thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. My mother's lips were pressed into a furious, thin white line, her eyes darting around the room, realizing that everyone was looking at them with thinly veiled disgust and pity. Nadia suddenly found her empty wine glass incredibly fascinating, refusing to look up, shrinking down into her expensive chair as if trying to disappear entirely. I had drawn the absolute, impenetrable boundary in front of everyone who mattered to their fake empire, and I had done it without breaking a single sweat. But the night was not over. I had one final, devastating card to play, and it was a masterpiece of karma reserved specifically for Nadia. During the final toast of the evening, I invited Serena up onto the stage to help me thank the major donors, the volunteers, and the Foundation's board of directors. As she stepped up gracefully beside me, taking the microphone from my hand, The bright stage spotlights perfectly caught the massive diamond on her hand and illuminated her beautiful face. She smiled warmly at the crowd, projecting absolute power, intelligence, and elegance. She spoke eloquently about the charity's mission, captivating the entire room. I looked down at table 4 and watched Nadia's face completely, fundamentally fall apart. I watched her eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated horror as the terrifying realization finally clicked into place. You see, Serena wasn't just my beautiful, supportive wife. Before we met, before I built my firm into a powerhouse, Serena was a senior executive vice president at the exact corporate bank that handled the commercial accounts for Tristan's failing business. 3 years ago, when Tristan's accounts first started bleeding red and checks began to bounce, Nadia had gone into that bank branch demanding special VIP treatment for a massively late commercial loan payment. When Serena politely and firmly refused to waive the massive late fees and penalties, citing strict bank policy and federal regulations, Nadia threw a massive, screaming, deeply embarrassing tantrum right in the middle of the crowded bank lobby. Nadia had aggressively pointed her manicured finger directly in Serena's face. She had called Serena a glorified secretary, insulted her salary, mocked her clothing, and screamed that she would have Serena fired and her entire career ruined because her husband was a very important, wealthy real estate mogul who could buy the entire bank and fire everyone in it. Serena had not yelled back. She had simply smiled her cold, professional corporate smile, formally flagged Tristan's account for a high-risk manual review, and calmly walked away, letting the armed bank security guards escort Nadia out of the building while customers recorded the meltdown on their phones. Now, Nadia was sitting in a cheap folding chair, watching the glorified secretary she had brutally insulted stand on a grand stage as the co-chair of a multi-million-dollar foundation. Serena was wearing a custom designer gown Nadia could not afford in 3 lifetimes, and she was happily married to the man Nadia had thrown away like trash in exchange for a bankrupt fraud. I watched Nadia physically deflate. All the arrogance left her body in a single exhale. She leaned over and whispered frantically to Tristan, her face pale, completely panicked, her hands shaking violently in her lap. That was the exact moment I knew they realized the game was entirely, irreversibly over. They had brought a plastic butter knife to a gunfight, and I owned the entire armory. After the toast concluded, Serena and I stepped down from the stage as a massive, thunderous wave of applause rolled over us. We returned to mingling, shaking hands, and closing minor deals with philanthropists. But I could feel my family's eyes burning into my back from across the room. They sat in a tight, silent, completely miserable triangle at their table. The energy around them had shifted completely. Where earlier they had been loudly leaning into conversations and begging for attention from the billionaires, now the other guests were actively walking past their table, completely ignoring them, treating them like a highly contagious disease. In a room like this, your reputation is your only true currency. And tonight, my family had gone completely, publicly bankrupt in front of the exact people they desperately wanted to impress. The optics were completely fatal. I didn't even walk over to say goodbye to them when they finally stood up and slinked out the side exit doors before the dessert course was even served. I didn't need to say a word. The absolute, crushing silence of the room as they left spoke for itself. The real world, tangible consequences hit my family with the speed, weight, and absolute devastation of a runaway freight train. 2 days after the gala, Harrison called my secure office line. I put him on speakerphone while I reviewed a set of blueprints. "Just a heads up, Julian," Harrison said, his tone entirely professional but carrying a hint of amusement. "Your brother Tristan reached out again this morning. He was practically begging for an advance on the downtown development project. He sounded entirely desperate, talking about needing to secure his supply chains. We formally and permanently rejected his bid. We sent the rejection via certified corporate mail. We didn't mention your direct involvement, obviously, but he will know. The street is already talking, Julian. He's completely radioactive. No one will touch his paper." The financial dominoes fell exactly as Harrison and I had predicted, but they fell even faster than I anticipated. Within a single week, Rumors about Tristan's humiliating public dressing down at the gala, combined with terrifying whispers of his massive, insurmountable debt, spread through the corporate real estate community like a vicious wildfire. Two of his remaining minor financial backers pulled their funding immediately, issuing cold corporate statements citing irreconcilable strategic differences and restructuring. By the end of the month, Victor Vance, the ruthless local loan shark Tristan had been borrowing from to cover his daily margins, formally called in his high-interest notes. Tristan didn't have the cash. He didn't even have a fraction of it. The massive commercial bank that held his primary accounts completely froze his assets, locking him out of everything. His company's flashy, boastful social media pages, once filled with pictures of fake success, went totally dark overnight. I sat in my penthouse office, drinking a cup of premium coffee, and watched the legal filings hit the public county registry one by one. It was an absolute bloodbath. The leased Porsche and the luxury Ferrari he had been driving to impress clients were repossessed in the middle of the night. They were dragged right out of the parking garage of his expensive building by tow trucks in front of the entire HOA board. By winter, the bank forced a brutal, expedited short sale on his luxury penthouse just to cover the absolute bare minimum of what he owed them. He was formally evicted. But financial ruin wasn't the only justice served. I still had the thick manila folder from Elena, the private investigator, sitting securely in my office safe. I didn't confront Tristan with it directly. I didn't want my fingerprints anywhere near his personal marital destruction. Instead, I had my corporate lawyer anonymously courier the time-stamped, high-resolution photos of Nadia and her 24-year-old personal trainer entering the cheap motel. The package was delivered directly to Tristan's remaining rented office space, right in the middle of a meeting with his bankruptcy attorney. The fallout was spectacular and entirely predictable. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Tristan exploded in a violent rage that shattered glass in his office. Nadia didn't even try to deny it when he confronted her. She knew the money was completely gone. She knew the luxury lifestyle she had sold her soul, her morals, and my heart for was a total, absolute illusion. She packed whatever authentic designer bags she had left, drained whatever small cash was left in a joint checking account, and abandoned him entirely without a second thought. The divorce filings hit the family courts 3 weeks later. It was a messy, vicious, highly public legal battle over essentially nothing. They were fighting like rabid dogs over absolute scraps, arguing over custody of leased living room furniture and screaming about who was responsible for the maxed-out credit card debt. There were no assets left to split. The marriage built on greed collapsed the second the bank accounts hit zero. And my parents? They absolutely did not escape the blast radius of their golden child's spectacular implosion. Because my father, in his pathetic, lifelong subservience to my mother, had foolishly co-signed Tristan's original penthouse lease, and used the remaining equity in their family home to personally guarantee Tristan's toxic business loans. The bank came after them with ruthless efficiency to recover the massive margins Tristan couldn't cover. My parents were completely blindsided. The bank threatened a massive, devastating lawsuit that would seize everything. To avoid total foreclosure and complete public ruin, my parents were forced to quietly, desperately list their 4-bedroom suburban home for sale at a massive loss. The mythical college fund they had always bragged about setting up for hypothetical future grandchildren was drained to pay legal fees. The massive inheritance they had always dangled over my head as a control tactic, constantly bragging about passing it down to Tristan to build his empire, was completely wiped out by the bank's lawyers in a matter of days. They lost everything they had spent 40 years building. They were forced to downsize to a small, cramped, 2-bedroom rented condo on the far outskirts of the city, miles away from the country clubs, the fine dining, and the high society circles my mother worshipped so deeply. They had sacrificed my happiness, my future, and my mental health to build a golden throne for my brother, only to realize the throne was made of cheap plastic and gasoline, and I was the one holding the match. A few months after the dust settled, as the first heavy snow of winter began to fall over the city streets, my phone buzzed on my heavy oak desk. It was an unknown number, but they left a voicemail. I pressed play and put it on speakerphone, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair, watching the snow drift past my office window. It was my mother, Vivian. Her voice sounded thin, brittle, and incredibly aged. The sharp, commanding arrogance that had defined my entire childhood was completely gone. It was replaced by a pathetic, desperate, wavering whine. "Julian," she croaked into the phone, her voice catching on a sob that sounded entirely manufactured. "It's Mom. Things have been very difficult lately. Tristan is struggling so much, he has nothing left, and your father and I had to move out of the house. The bank took it. We really need your help right now. We see your name in the papers, we know you are doing so well, and we are so proud of you. I think we should sit down and talk, maybe over dinner. Family is important, Julian. We need to stick together in hard times. We are your blood. Please call me back. We love you." I sat in my office, looking out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the glittering skyline I was literally helping to design and build. I listened to her use the word family, as if it was a magic spell, a get-out-of-jail-free card that could instantly erase 6 years of betrayal, cruelty, and total, callous abandonment. She didn't call to apologize for convincing my fiancé to leave me and marry my brother. She didn't call to apologize for treating me like a second-class citizen my entire life while worshipping a fraud. She didn't acknowledge the profound pain she caused. She called because the golden child had failed spectacularly, the money had dried up, and she needed to tap into the salary and resources of the scapegoat to survive her own terrible choices. I waited for the old familiar sting of anger. I waited for the bitter resentment to boil up in my chest, the way it used to when I was a struggling junior architect. But it didn't come. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt completely, wonderfully, peacefully empty when it came to them. They were no longer my family. They were just strangers who happened to share my DNA. I reached over, tapped the screen of my phone, and permanently deleted the voicemail. I blocked the number. There would be no dramatic confrontation. There would be no screaming match in a coffee shop. There would be no tearful closure conversation where I explained how much they hurt me, because people like that do not care about your pain. They only care about what you can provide for them. The ultimate boundary is absolute silence. Their funeral as my family had already happened 6 years ago in the shadows of my driveway. I just finally finished throwing the dirt on the casket and walking away from the graveyard. The following year, Serena and I hosted the Foundation's charity gala again. It was bigger, brighter, and significantly more exclusive than the year before. We raised millions of dollars for causes we actually cared about, funding scholarships and community development programs. As I stood on the grand stage during the opening speech, wearing a perfectly tailored suit, holding my incredible wife's hand, I looked out at the massive sea of faces looking back at me. I saw brilliant friends. I saw loyal, trusted business partners. I saw people who respected me for my mind, my integrity, and my relentless work ethic, not for my last name or my bank account. I had built my own family from scratch, surrounded by people who celebrated my victories instead of plotting to steal them. I raised my crystal glass, the bright stage lights catching the rim, making it sparkle in the massive ballroom. "To progress," I said into the microphone, smiling out at the crowd before me, my voice echoing with genuine joy, "and to remembering that those who actively doubt you, and those who try their hardest to break you, often end up giving you the exact tools, the exact motivation, and the exact strength you need to build your own unbreakable empire." The crowd laughed, cheered loudly, and clinked their glasses together in celebration. But in my own mind, in the quiet, peaceful space of my own thoughts, I was toasting a table in the very back of the room. A table with 3 empty chairs that absolutely no one in the room had even noticed were missing. And that was the very last time I ever thought of my family as anything other than a closed, heavily locked chapter of a book I simply no longer read. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line and walk away from the people who were supposed to protect you, in order to protect yourself. Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Remember, your worth is not determined by the people who are too blind to see it.